Here we go. Welcome to our Solar Sessions Q3 2025 EU Solar Markets webinar. Every quarter again and again. As usual, we do it once we feel we have good visibility into the last quarter. That's usually one and a half month into the new quarter. We're halfway through to Q4, now looking at Q3. My name is Michael Schmäler. I'm the Exec Advisor of Solar Power Europe, and I'm also Director of Market Intelligence, being responsible for all our research here and the team. If you are joining us for the first time. Okay, just a brief disclaimer as usual. Please keep that what you learn for yourself. This is a member exclusive webinar, so please don't post any screenshots from the slides on social media. Obviously, you can reflect on what you've learned and discuss it, but please, no slides. That's just for members. Like usual, the slides are made available for you and can be accessed in our memberships area on the website. We have packed 90 minutes today, very exciting, with a lot of people. What we're doing today is actually we're also almost closing the research for our market outlook. We're sharing part of our research with you. We need still more, 2 more weeks, then we're done, and we'll finalize the product that we will launch on December 11th. What we want to do today also, we haven't done that in the past, since we have so much intelligence being around, we will later on also involve you with some polls. If you are on the market intelligence side as well, or on procurement, and have your numbers on markets, it would be nice if you could open up your files databases so that you can help us also a little bit and exchange your views with us. Let's take maybe just one conclusion. Where we probably will end up. This is from our mid-year outlook, which we published in July, and there we indicated that the market will decrease for the first time in 10 years. So far as it looks, it will be similar to what we forecasted there. At least at the moment, we don't have any indication that the market will be positive, in the positive growth area. As it looks like also the way we're modeling it, we might not reach the 750 gigawatt REPowerEU target, but that's still to be discussed. We're still modeling. Okay, what do we have today? First, my colleague Jonathan will give an overview on what we are doing, our research on markets. We're really happy to have with us Marius Wacke from Rystad Energy, who's heading solar and research at this market research company, and he will talk about market trends and share some of their latest intelligence. We will then have Arthur from our policy group talking about our views and learnings on the latest policy developments in Brussels. Then we move to the markets, actually. This time we have 2 markets under our magnifying glasses. Once it's Italy, and we have 2 associations. We have Michelangelo Lafronza from Ania Rinnovabili, and we have Paolo Dermo from Elettricità Futura, both members speaking on Italy. Then we have also a zoom in on the Finnish market, where some exciting things are also going on. We're happy to have with us Clara Tapper from Renewables Finland. Then I will close after 90 minutes please, if you have any questions, comments, always write them into the Q&A. We're happy to answer them directly or towards the end, but whenever you feel you have something to contribute, please go ahead and don't wait. And so we move on and have our first presenter. Jonathan, please share us what you've learned from the markets.
Thank you, Michael. Yes, hi everyone. We're here again with the EU27 market updates, and this time we have a lot to share. And we're right at the end of Q3 when it comes to publicly available data and our storyline. And as you will get from what I'm about to present, this Q4 will be crucial and can really go into both directions for a lot of markets, towards either a year-on-year growth or a decrease. At the end of this presentation, as well, as Michael says, I will do a little poll to hear your views. The poll will be anonymous, and it could help us a lot to see whether we have any blind spots or whether we have skipped anything. I'm also happy to discuss the results of this poll. So let's dive into it. I'll start with the biggest market in the EU, as always, the German market. And what was super interesting this time, in Q3, we saw a market rise of 73% in utility scale installations. Okay, the Q2 was low, as you can see in this bar chart on the right. But 73% means that if you take into account there is some latency in the registrations, we will have seen the highest point ever in utility scale installations in Germany on a quarterly basis. So it will likely extend above this Q4 of 2024 peak that you see. What is also relatively good to see is that the rooftop market did not further decrease, but rather stabilize in Q3 compared to Q2. So far, almost exactly 12 gigawatts of solar installations have been registered. And as always, the latest quarter will be updated, so it's not complete at all. But at the current pace, given that historically Q4 is a bigger quarter, we might reach our latest mid-year forecast that we did a couple of months back of 16.9 gigawatts, which would mean a decrease in market size. So this is the first market where it's a make or break fourth quarter, whether we see some growth or whether we see a decrease. Then more publicly available data from the Spanish side on ground-mounted solar. So what I've done here is compare every monthly installations of 23, 24, and 25. Note again that 25 will be updated, so this is not at all final. But what you can see over January to October, even though these last 3 months of available data are very low and will be updated, still it's higher than the same period in 2024. What we also know is that typically the last 4 months are high in utility scale installations for a variety of reasons. So this leads us to believe that this 7.6 gigawatt of utility scale that we did as a forecast in our mid-year report, that it might actually be an underestimation at the current pace at least. So again, a market in which the fourth quarter will make or break whether we see a lot of growth or this 2% growth on the utility scale. Italian market then is less of a happy update. Here you see, and our colleagues of the Italian associations will go into it likely. Here you see that utility scale has dropped by 25%. Although there is so much uplifting policy news and so much policy innovation as well going on in Italy, especially when compared to other EU27 markets, it's not materializing in any big utility scale installations this year compared to 2024 then. What we also saw is a pretty big drop in installations below 20 kilowatts of almost 20%. So much like the rest of Europe, what you see here and what you'll see in following slides as well, is that the bigger the rooftop installation, the more resilient this market segment is to changes. Now in Italy, as many of you will know, there is some uplifting policy news like the FedEx auctions and more. So this, let's hope it returns to a higher level in the future. Then the French market, we have also reached a record here. So for the first time ever, over 1.5 gigawatts of quarterly installations were installed. This means that we are now in 2025 at 4.3 gigawatts AC. So that's 90% of what was installed in 2024, which means that the fourth quarter can get pretty bad and we'll still have some growth. But now the question is, how bad would the fourth quarter be? And that's also what I'm very curious to hear your answers of in the quiz. Because personally, I think it might decrease. We have some government uncertainty. We have a lessening of ambitions. We have a feed-in tariff decrease. We have all sorts of things going on in France. So yeah, where will this fourth quarter go, and how much growth would we see in 2025? What is on the basis of this growth is not the key segment, which is the commercial installations of 100 kilowatt AC to 250 kilowatt AC. But it's rather the utility scale segment, which in the third quarter rose by 35% in comparison to the previous quarter. So here it's just switched market shares with the commercial segment. So commercial segment lost 5% and utility scale segment earned 5%. Of the installations on a quarterly basis. Then another big market to keep an eye on is a Polish one. And since we only have data until August, what we've done here is extrapolated September as if the same pace would be retained as it did in the first 2 months of the quarter. If that happens, we would have a quarter that goes over 900 megawatts. And that would be an increase compared to the 820 megawatts of Q2. Now, August and July were especially good in the utility scale segment. So as you can see, if you would extrapolate, the growth comes from the utility scale segment. And that begs the question, we have, again, here a two-sided story, which makes it harder to estimate this market. On the one hand, we have all this news about regulatory uncertainty, a high curtailment, and other issues. But on the other hand, this might indicate like the start of a higher utility scale installation period then tied to hybrid installations, widespread storage adoption, and so forth. So yeah, what direction will this go? We will reveal our forecast in the European market outlook, but I'm curious to hear your opinions as well. Then the Netherlands are number 6 big market. Here, what I've done is taken data on the rooftop segment, and you can almost see this perfect inverse exponential curve, which is a unfortunate sight. The rooftop market has not bottomed out, as there were some signals last quarter since it had almost 0% growth. Now it dropped again by 18%. And now we have a rooftop segment, so everything below 1 megawatts, that is roughly above 200 megawatts, which is a 1/6 of what you saw in 2023 at the peak level in Q2. Now here again, there is a glimpse of hope, so to say. We have the recent election results in which we had D66 winning the election. which might result in more favorable and which will likely result in more favorable policies for Dutch solar. So when will this revamp happen? That's the big question. Some other key markets I want to briefly highlight. So first of all, Belgium, Flanders, specifically the biggest region when it comes to solar development. There is a little bit of growth in Q2 data compared to Q1. So Q2 residential segment rose by roughly 70%, and the commercial segment slowed down by 10%. The commercial segment and CNI as a whole might increase in the future again because there is a solar mandate for CNI coming in 2026. So businesses will have to comply with it. Then in Romania, what is interesting to see is that you had this dip in prosumers. So prosumers is a different definition in Romania, but let's assume anyone who doesn't have as the main purpose electricity production, but uses the electricity more than it produces it. So that's roughly the definition of prosumer in Romania. And what you see here, that the yellow part of this chart, the household prosumers, are picking up again, even above the 2024 levels. Two other markets, we have Portugal and Austria. So Portugal, if you extrapolate, you get roughly to 2 gigawatts this year. Whether that will happen is the question of how strong Q4 will be. And Austria, we have very low markets, so roughly 20% lower if you compare the first 2 quarters to the previous 2 quarters in 2024. Then I'm going to rapidly go through some news. So here we have this typical news timeline. I'll highlight a few important points. Mainly, we see in Germany over late August to November some company updates. So we have SMA, for example, laying off 350 employees, which is big news. It's the 4th time, I believe, they do this. So that's an unfortunate sign for the inverter business in Europe. Then good news from Germany as well is that they will do this massive project of 4 gigawatt hours of storage. And it's announced that Fluence Energy will deliver the batteries. We also have 2 very positive tender results in October, of which the innovation tender was 4 times oversubscribed. So roughly 2 gigawatts or a bit more than 2 gigawatts of purely solar and storage projects. Spain then, a lot of news on regulatory side. So the most important segment there is in November, where the approval of the decree that had some points in it of the anti-blackout decree, which should boost storage and grid modernization. So really take a look at that because it's pretty deterministic of the future of solar in Spain. Then Italy, as mentioned, and our colleagues will surely go into it, a lot of positive developments there when it comes to auctions. The most significant one, or the one I keep an eye on a lot, is this Maxe auction of 10 gigawatt hours at very low prices. Then, as many of you will have noticed, there was this tax incentive for EU-made heterojunction modules and tandem modules, this news from 2-3 days ago, which is also worth paying attention to, especially for companies such as Trisun, which is for now the sole beneficiary of this. The final slide here. So in Poland, there was allocation of big budgets for the 6th edition of the My Electricity scheme. But there's also some unsettling sides, mainly that Air Power sells a big part of their portfolio in Poland. Which is again this 2 sides of the medal. In France, then you have this VAT rule of 5.5% in green to pay attention to. Now, for the moment, it's Voltec who is benefiting from this, but will they relax the rules on these modules, or will they certify other modules? That's the big question. And one other thing I want to highlight here is in November, France revised off-peak hours from November 1st. So the definition of what is an off-peak hour and how it's remunerated. And Enedis expects that this will shift 5 gigawatts of demand to off-peak hours, which is a crazy amount for a simple rule adjustment. Then in the Netherlands, two big things I want to highlight is they ended the incentive scheme for domestic PV manufacturing called Solar NL. And they are working on long-term solar development and renewable integration because TenneT, the Dutch TSO, is granting grid access to 6 gigawatts of battery projects out of the 9 gigawatts of extra capacities enabled under a special type of contract. And they're also planning CFDs, two-sided CFDs, to replace the current version of the SDE++ in 2027. So as you see from the news and everything I've just mentioned, there's a lot of moving parts. And what I'm curious to hear about now from you guys is, what do you believe will happen to these main markets? So we've had a little poll set up, and it should appear on your screens about now. Yes. If you have any intelligence about these markets at all, or any gut feeling even, I'd be very interested to hear your views. There's always the option to answer don't know, so don't be shy. And for those of you that go very much into the markets, there is a final room for any additional comments. So I'll go through the questions, but yeah, you can of course answer them at your own pace. At first, we're interested in your view on the total German installations. So in 2025 compared to 2024, we're also interested in your view on Spanish ground-mounted installations. As I mentioned, this fourth quarter will be pretty decisive on whether we see a lot of growth or not. And with the current PPA environment, there's a lot of room for a slowdown or still some retainment of the current installation pace. Then Italian installations. So we estimated them to be 6 gigawatts roughly in 24. Will they grow again, in your opinion? The Dutch rooftop market, when will this dip end? When will it bottom out? And will we see some growth even in Q4? For Poland, then, is this better Q3? Is this a sign that we are up again in market installations? And I'm also curious to hear about your expectations for 2026. So as we mentioned in our mid-year report, we expect it to be a decrease in 2025, we expect it to be a decrease with minus 1.2%, I believe. Does this decrease continue in 2026, in your opinion? Finally, also curious to hear about your view on PPAs. They slowed down by quite a bit. We also noticed that in the resource conference organized last week. And so the question is here, when will new designs of these PPAs be sufficiently attractive enough to revamp the market? And then if you have any other comments, feel free to add them. We'll give it 1 more minute.
And while you give them the minute, maybe you can answer one question here. So which segment do you expect to grow the most following the Dutch elections? That's in the Q&A.
So the big thing in the Dutch market is, after the Wilders government came about, so the previous government, they canceled all the rules. So they canceled, for example, the mandate on EVs to some extent and the heat pump mandate. And so electrification in the future became less attractive, but also they caused even more uncertainty when it came to the net metering phase out, which was supposed to go gradually. And then they just said, no, we stop it in 2027 and we don't give any follow up. And that caused a lot of people to lose faith and a lot of bad press, of course, for PV installations. Now, the question is, with this new government, will they find an adequate way to follow up the net metering, just abrupt stop of the net metering in 2027? And if they do so, this rooftop segment can really grow, because we're at a very low level, as you saw from the presentation. So in terms of relative growth, this can go a long way. Then what you also see is these big battery storage markets going up. And so that can unlock a utility scale as well. So that would be my answer to this.
Okay.
I think we have results. Very interesting.
But let's move quickly and then.
Yeah. So we see the audience is much divided. I'll go quickly through this, which is the best, of course. We see a widespread division between growth in Germany. Some expected to decrease, but the most chosen answer is 500 megawatts to 1 gigawatt of growth. Then utility scale is not expected to grow more than a gigawatt in Spain, but the most selected answer is, beside don't know, between 500 to 1 gigawatts of growth. Can stay roughly the same as well. In Italy, the most selected answer is 500 megawatts to 1 gigawatt of a decrease. In the Dutch rooftop market, most of you didn't know. No one does, I can believe. But the most chosen response beside that is less. What will happen in Q4 in Poland? Most chosen answer is that it will either be the same or more. And the expectations for 26 are super divided. So it's either +1 to +3% or -1 to -3%. Some are also seeing more than -3%. And then expectations for PPA volumes are higher in 2026. The second chosen option is lower. Wow. Okay, great. That's some insightful results. Thank you all for participating to this. Yeah, over to you, Michael. We can.
Well, let's simply continue with the next speaker. So let's have the analyst also digest what he heard and put it into his trends. So we give the word to Marius.
Thank you very much. I mean, very interesting to see the spread on that poll. I mean, whether or not Germany is going to increase by 1 gigawatt or decrease by 1 gigawatt. I think we're approaching sort of the end of the year, so we should have some idea of that. But I just wanted to sort of quickly start off the presentation with our outlook for Europe as a whole. So this is not the EU27 that Jonathan was, or maybe it was you, Michael, actually was showing this earlier on. But for Europe as a whole, we are expecting actually a small increase compared to 2024. But our sort of longer term outlook for Europe is not too positive. I mean, you're running into a lot of issues regarding the revenue streams of solar in general. Now, utility scale is a segment that we do see as being quite strong in Europe. Really a segment that can still sort of secure offtakes through either auctions or corporate PPAs. And we also have here in residential and the C&I segments is something that is resilient within Europe. And we'll have to see how this rooftop regulation, the EPBD from 2027 and onwards actually do end up playing out. But the main issue with solar in Europe, you keep coming back to the cannibalization of PV capture rates. Now, funnily enough, the exact same thing that's causing all of these issues for solar deployments in Europe is really accelerating the adoption of BESS systems. And so be that the need for resource adequacy, the shifting of solar generation through sort of from the middle of the day through later in the evenings. But you're also seeing revenue potentials from arbitrage and also from frequency control and ancillary services on batteries. So while the sunshine story for solar might be a bit delayed, we're really expecting quite the acceleration on BESS uptake in Europe. So as I mentioned, the revenue for solar in Europe has been decreasing over the last couple of years. And as you can see here, this is essentially the cumulative number of negative hours in European power markets from 2020 to 2025. And ever since 2022, you've seen big increases year on year in 2023 and 2024, and also in 2025. So the number here for 2025 at the end is at the beginning of November. So you still have 2 more months, and we'll probably end up at a higher total cumulative number than for 2024. But I also think the interesting thing here is the seasonality of these negative hours. So you can see that the acceleration of these curves really happen around April. And then they tend to slow down around September, October. So indicative of this is that this is really being increasingly caused by solar additions and solar generation across the continent. Also, if we go and move a bit more granularly, so into hours of the day, when do we see these negative prices happen? And here you have Denmark in blue, Finland in orange, France in dark green, Germany in light green. One small caveat here that Denmark is comprised of 2 price zones, whereas the other ones are just the one. So if we were to divide those, they would probably be a bit below Germany and France, respectively. But the interconnection of the European grid means that whenever you're installing a lot of solar, be it in Germany or anywhere else, you are impacting the revenue potential of solar basically everywhere in Europe. Now, Finland is starting to see some of the same signs that we're seeing in the middle of the day in Germany and France, with a lot of negative hours starting to accumulate. But there's still somewhat more room there for solar installations than in France and Germany, without necessarily creating a lot more negative hours. So we do have some deep dive on Finland later on in the webinar, so I'll leave that for then. But diving a bit deeper into Germany and the capture rates that we were talking about. So here you can see the capture rate, which is essentially just the received price as a percentage of the monthly spot prices from the solar power that you're generating. So year over year from 21 to 25, we've seen a deterioration of these capture rates in Germany. And 2025 was especially bad. And you see that as more solar generation enters the energy mix in a given country, that the capture rates just drop off. And we were down at 30% in May and June, and then you had this short-term relief happening in July. Not necessarily because we had a lot of sudden battery adoption happening in Germany, and that being able to take some of the load off of solar PV systems. But it's the other side of the coin, which is what can else sort of better these capture rates. It's about power demand response. And so you had a heat wave, you had less wind generation, you had increased demand coming from air conditioning across the continent, and less ramp up of coal and nuclear to also meet this. And suddenly you do see that the capture prices for German solar PV actually increases and went past the 2024 levels, but still remained below the 2023 levels. Now, following this heat wave, you went down to new record lows in August and September. And then when you start approaching October, November, it's quite common that, I mean, solar generation tends to dip off towards the later end of the year. And so you will move closer to that 100% line. But the trend is that it's getting worse in Germany. There is one other market that's not really hit as hard of this cannibalization as Germany, and that is Italy, another country that we will dive deeper into further down the webinar. But Italy is a bit different than Germany. You've had, I would say, at least a decade of pretty slow solar additions every single year. It's also a bit different in the sense that you don't really have negative hours in Italy. So when capture prices would be really bad, they don't really go below zero. But here you also have some more room to install solar PV without only receiving 30% of the monthly spot price on average. So Italy is one of those markets that we do expect to still grow within Europe. The reason why I chose sort of Germany and Italy here is because we can draw some parallels to other power markets across the ocean, namely ERCOT, which is the Texan power market, and CAISO, which is the Californian power market, because these do resemble Italy and Germany in some sense. So if you do look to ERCOT, you can see that solar installations and battery installations, so these are on the left-hand side, they keep ramping up at more or less the same rate. Now, solar installations really started to take off around 2019, and then you had energy storage coming in around 2020. So these are ramping up at more or less the same pace. Now, California is a bit more similar to what we do see in Germany. You've had sort of a long-standing history of adding in quite a lot of solar, and then having BESS come in at a later stage. So what we have seen in CAISO from 2023 is this decline in solar PV installation, much like the slowdown that we do see across all of Europe at the moment. But they've been staying at a very high BESS deployment rate over the last couple of years and actually moving past that of solar PV. Now, how does this then translate into the capture prices in those respective power markets? And if you look at CAISO in the black line here, you can see that there's been a downward trend for capture prices for solar PV in California until 2024. But with those years of adding in more energy storage than solar PV, you've actually seen an improvement so far in 2025 when it comes to solar PV capture prices in California, which could make for a sort of a good signal for the European market that if we do accelerate the battery adoption, you are able to improve the economics of solar PV as well. Now, for ERCOT, that actually started installing solar and BESS more or less at the same time at a certain rate, they've been able to keep those capture prices very, very stable. And so in the case of Italy, I mean, you had the Maxi auction that Jonathan mentioned. The adoption of batteries is happening, and there's room to grow solar alongside that without going through the same kind of cannibalization that we have seen elsewhere on the continent. For the last part of the presentation, since we've been talking about revenues, another side of the coin for, let's say, solar PV project economics would be component pricing. And we'll focus on the price dynamics in China, seeing as most of the modules being deployed in Europe, they do hail from Chinese manufacturers. And after a very prolonged time of like bottomed out prices along the value chain, we have seen price increases from July, starting early on with the polysilicon, really driven by this anti-involution policy coming from Beijing. And that has translated partly through to the wafer prices and also to the cell prices, so that you can see those small increases in prices for both of those segments. But it really hasn't passed through to the modules yet. Also worth noting on the polysilicon is that the increase that we really saw happening in July is starting to flatten out coming into October and November. Now, for wafers and for cells, some of the reason why we're able to actually pass through the cost or the increased cost of polysilicon is because you do have demand not only within China, but also in overseas markets. I mean, you suddenly have India with this ALMM list 2. You have the AD/CVD coming on Chinese manufacturers for cells and modules. And suddenly you see stockpiling outside of China, and that really helped the wafer and the cell segments to kind of pass through some of these increased costs. But once you start seeing the increase in cost of polysilicon, so you can see that from July with this anti-involution policy, just saying that you can't really sell below cost, the gross profit margins of polysilicon production in China is positive. So now they're making money. But instantly what happens in July is that polysilicon manufacturers also increase their production levels. So some of the reason why all of this rapid decline in PV component prices has been so low, and why it happened so fast is because of the oversupply situation that we have been in for quite some time. And you can say that if you're able to curb production, you can restore some kind of supply-demand balance. But at the first opportunity to produce at a gross profit, you also see that most manufacturers actually increase production. So the market fundamentals that saw the price drop in PV components, they really haven't changed. So any further price increases there is really contingent on policy from Beijing. This is my last slide, and it shows the module exports out of China. Now, let's say the traditional destinations such as South America, Europe, and Australia, they have seen a bit of a slowdown and flattening out over the last year or so. Really mirrors our deployment outlook for those regions as well. You have seen an uptick in Middle East. You have seen an uptick in Africa, and also the rest of APAC outside of Australia. But all in all, it just flattens out. So as you're seeing less demand domestically in China following the market reform that we saw in May for residential C&I and June for utility scale, and the fact that demand is not really increasing that much outside of China, it's going to be very hard for module manufacturers to pass through any added cost earlier on in the value chain to developers and procurement teams, because there's still going to be too much supply and not enough places to install them. So with that, I think I'll leave the word to you, Michael.
Yeah.
And yes, this should be one of my last slides.
Thanks,
There we
Marek.
go.
Okay, let's maybe different than usual. I have a few questions also after the presentation. So let's stay from my side quickly on a little bit on the pricing front. I think that's also an important one, of course, with the situation as is in Europe and capture rates being as they are. It's hard for developers these days, and so procurement is obviously key. And there is this sort of hanging sword of the tax support being abolished. This 9%, it's not so much. It's maybe we're talking about a cent or so from the module, but it's could happen. And the question is, as you've shown, silicon price went up, silver price, cell price, wafer price somewhat, module basically hasn't moved. So, but the macro environment doesn't look like it's changing. Still, the Chinese government would like to change things also, obviously. So, are you seeing any levers or indications that there might be something coming from China to foster consolidation and also to get it up, which would have, of course, then also some consequences for developers in Europe and around the world?
I mean, we don't really see anything that's really new, to put it that way, because I mean, for the last couple of years, you've heard from Beijing that they want to kind of curb this overproduction. They want to make sure that consolidation kind of happens, that only the most efficient production lines stay in operations. And we don't really see anything new on that side. Now, there's of course talks about this joint venture on the polysilicon side, essentially consolidating, I believe it's like up to 1 million metric tons of polysilicon under one joint venture that would make it easier to control production. Now, within polysilicon, this seems more feasible than if you go into more fragmented parts of the value chain, meaning you have way more players, such as the cell and the module side. But just sticking on the polysilicon side, what we have seen is that consumption rates for, let's say, how many grams of polysilicon do you need for 1 watt peak of finished module has decreased extremely rapidly over the last couple of years. It's probably back in 2022 when you were saying 3 grams of polysilicon equals 1 watt peak of a finished module. Now, when you're talking to, let's say, your big wafer manufacturers, the number being quoted is 1.7. So even if you were to, let's say, completely mothball 1 million metric tons of polysilicon production or capacity in China, you will still have more than enough polysilicon manufacturing capacity to meet demand for solar PV, even if it were to, let's say, double. So the oversupply situation is something that's going to be extremely difficult to tackle. You're seeing these new requirements for, I mean, efficiencies, how much energy do you use to produce a certain amount of your product? But once again, this is not really something new. This is not even just a couple of years back. You've had these requirements back to at least 2015 and probably before that as well.
Okay, thanks. So I think there are a few more questions. Maybe you can actually even answer them in the chat, and then we move on. So because we have a pretty dense schedule, and then we if there's anything left, we can also discuss towards the end. So we're moving back to Solar Power Europe, and now I have my colleague Arthur talk about what we see on the policy side of things here in Brussels. Arthur, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, Michael. Hello, everybody. I hope you can hear me well. So, indeed, I'll give you guys a bit of an overview of what's happening in the EU policy and politics. I have to say, so since the beginning of this EU mandate, since the May of 2024, it's been a year of strategizing, of big narratives, and of preparing for the next few years in terms of legislative texts. So I'll give an overview of what's happening mostly in the Council, so with ministers and in the European Commission, so that you know a bit what is narrative that is dominating in Brussels and what we can expect in terms of impact for the policy and for, in the end, our sector in solar. So if you have any question, if you want to work further on any of those areas with us, you're welcome to do so. We'll be happy to respond and work with you. So to give you an overview of the timeline since this summer, so basically one of the important meetings that we saw was the Franco-German economic agenda at the end of August. I think that's an important point to remember, where now there's slightly more stable governments on both sides and they can work together. So they've been working on declarations together and on more collaboration, including on interconnections, on also joint positions on the accounting of battery carbon footprint, because there's a bit of a conflict between the French and the German positions there, and we think it's really important that PPAs, for example, and any kind of market dynamics are taken into consideration, not just national energy mixes. That's a big point of our advocacy these days. They're also working more on a strategy for pushing all kinds of decarbonized energy sources post 2030. So I understand renewables and nuclear. Two other things that I want to mention here are working potentially on industrial electricity prices. So that's the German asks. German ask that the French are more or less engaging discussions or a bit more easily now. And on the other side, the French are making Germans accept more the idea of European preference and the creation of lead markets for decarbonizing European products. So those are a bit of an exchange of good practices and narratives. And these narratives are getting stronger and stronger in Brussels. At the level of energy ministers, so at the Energy Council, they met a couple of times already. So on the 4th and 5th September, they met once. Denmark has the presidency of the council for this second half of 2025, and they've been focusing on bringing back the countries and member states together instead of the old separation that we had between the nuclear alliance and the renewables alliance. They want to bring them together into friends of decarbonization altogether and talk about clean generation from all kinds of sources, price signals for flexibility, electrification, grid stability, cybersecurity. So those aspects of policymaking that are more common to everybody, and that indeed would push the transition further. That's what we need as solar as well. They are working on tripartite contracts. So those are kind of informal contracts that they want the public sector, so the Commission or member states, to sign with the end use, so the industry side that uses a lot of electricity. Yeah, so with the public sector and with the energy sector, sorry. So the idea is to give a bit more visibility between the energy suppliers, the energy users, and the public sector. This was especially useful for wind, as they want more visibility for future auctions to develop their projects more. It will also be developed for battery storage, and we're in touch with the European Commission to see what it can look like a bit to push forward best deployment standalone, best deployment in hybridization of projects, and also making sure that our supply chains are more diversified and more European than they currently are. Moving along, as I said, there's a big move towards more EU preference or made in EU criteria in European policymaking. This was the case on the 30th September in the discussions between economy and industry ministers. So we were there, and there was specifically a meeting to talk about solar and battery supply chains. So overall, there's a big consensus that we need to act faster in implementing the Net Zero Industry Act. This is the text that tells member states to include resilience criteria in their auctions. But now there's also support for going further, one step further, and adding potentially some local content, EU preference criteria in auctions as well. And the discussion at the moment is how to do that. So Solar Power Europe has a clear position there that we encourage the use of resilience criteria in auctions, as the law now says member states should do. And we also encourage member states to add EU preference bonus, so that EU-made PV systems could be advantaged over other systems. Yeah, so the last idea from the Commission, especially the industry commissioner, Stéphane Séjourné, is that we encourage EU and China partnerships, but on our terms, meaning that we add some conditions to Chinese investments into Europe with some kind of technology and knowledge transfer and different conditions, so that we are also advantaged and it's not just pure Chinese capture of the market. So we discussed it with our European Solar Industry Alliance, the alliance that we have with the European Commission, and this was exactly the same topics. Going forward in the council as well, I'm going to finish it here. Then on the 20th of October, the council met again, so the energy ministers in Brussels, and it's a bit of confirmation that the agenda of the Danish presidency is working well. They adopted their position on ending the import of Russian gas into Europe as of 2028. So, seeing that the Parliament's position is very similar, they will adopt an EU text very quickly on this. And they launched a discussion on electrification of end uses with the presence of Mr. Jan Rosnau, who is a bit of a star in our world for this. Sorry. And there's really broad support within member states and in the Energy Council to work on this jointly and to end a bit the debates on the generation side. So this is really a good sign that we see from our leaders that electrification will be center stage in the energy discussions for the next couple of years. Sorry. And next discussion in the council is on the climate target. So on the 5th November, the environment ministers met for the Environmental Council and adopted their position on the 2040 climate target for the EU. So they adopted their position that says the target should be at 90% GHG emissions reduction compared to 1990. Of course, they added a lot of flexibilities, including the first one that you see is that countries can use international credits for fulfilling 5% of the target. And also they pushed the European Commission to delay by 1 year the entry into force of ETS2. So that's the carbon market for road transport and buildings. Next up is the position of the European Parliament. So there's a little mistake on the slide because it was made a week ago. But basically the Environment Committee of the Parliament adopted its position on Monday. The Parliament as a whole in plenary session will adopt its position on tomorrow, and it's basically a copy paste. So the position that you see on the screen is what we should see more or less as the EU text legally, which means that we're also very close to having a legal mandate for having a real 2040 framework for renewable energy as well. This climate target gives the mandate to the Commission to adopt now a whole framework for the transition for the next 15 years. So this is what we're going to see as a direction next. Moving on to the Commission side now. On the 10th September, President of the Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, gave her State of the European Union address, where she takes stock of everything that's been happening for 1 year and gives some hints of what's going to come out in the following months. And those narratives that you see on the screen are super important because this is really everything that will drive the work of the Commission for the next few months. And the first one was a bit novel, a bit new for us. She talked about European independence. You can see the quotes on the slides more precisely, but we're coming from a world where it was really about free trade into a world that was about strategic autonomy, where we wanted to still have free trade, but with strategic interests where we diversified our imports, where we had more internally, to a world where we talked about resilience. So here was even more accepted that we wanted to move away from a dominant source of supply, now to wording that talks about energy independence. So we don't exactly know what it means yet, but it's even more of a strong statement than before on the resilience aspect. So it can mean things for raw materials import, for supply chain, for energy imports as such. So we need to know what it means really. And she emphasized this with the Made in EU narrative, especially for building clean tech in Europe. And she's really strong on electrification and electricity grids. Following from that, the Commission had to publish their work program for 2026. So it's a detailed table of everything they aim to publish in 2026. And we had a bit of a fear. So at Solar Power Europe, because we saw a draft of this version, and it said there will be an energy omnibus and or an electrification omnibus. And in EU language these days, that means that they were going to take old texts from the past and simplify, or you can say deregulate them. We were afraid of this because we have good texts, especially for supporting electrification and mostly for permitting for renewable energy projects. And we don't want the Commission to reopen everything and change everything. We rather want countries, member states to implement them as fast as possible. So that's what we said to the European Commission. And when the work program was officially announced, we were happy to see that instead of a plan to take old text and change them, instead of that, they are planning to put forward a plan for 2040. So instead of looking at the past, they're looking at the future and seeing what kind of targets and other rules for boosting renewables they can implement for 2040. So there's also the confirmation that there will be an electrification action plan, a review of the energy security framework, for which we have a lot of hope that renewables will be better considered, a public procurement act, where they will change the rules for public procurement, including for adding Made in EU criteria. And the only omnibus, in the end, the only simplification work that they will do for our sectors is on the energy product legislation. So for those that know about it, it's the eco-design legislation. I wanted to go quickly over the work related to the Iberian blackout, but I'm afraid I'm going to have to skip it. I'm really happy to discuss it if there's any question. And to end it here, this is a bit of an overview for the coming text, so I'm not going to go over all of it. Just so you know, there's a big package coming on the 10th of December, which we're going to take a good look at and send an analysis to our members. This is on the Industrial Accelerator Act, the grids package, and a revision of the carbon border adjustment mechanism, as well as a strategy for clean energy investments. You see on the left-hand side in a red box that there's made in EU criteria that we expect to appear in the Industrial Accelerator Act and in the Public Procurement Act. Feel free, so this is just to give you an overview so that you can reach out to us also, so that you can know what's coming if you get the slides, and that you can reach out to us to talk about any of those initiatives. This is not an extensive list, it's not everything that will be done, but it's everything that we will look at Solar Power Europe for the coming year. So happy to discuss this more if you want to, and reach out to us if you want to work on this more precisely. Thank you very much. Back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Arthur. So we have now 30 minutes. So if everyone keeps his or her 10 minutes, then we have a point landing. If there are any questions to Arthur, please write it in the Q&A and he will be happy to answer them. Okay, next presentation comes on Italy. So we call it the ray of hope in Europe at the moment. A very interesting, promising market. So different views on that as we saw in the poll, but Michelangelo from ANI Rinnovabili will shine some more light into the Italian market. Michelangelo, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael. Hello, everybody. I'm the Secretary of ANI Rinnovabili, and today I'm focused on PV and BESS market and some spots on policy framework. First of all, just an introduction of ANI. ANI is an organization that represents the industries in the electronics and electrical engineering sector and the industrial general contractors. ANI Renewable represents all the renewable technologies and the supply chain except the balancing responsible party. Starting with PV market. Italia PV market is as a roller coaster. In 2025, residential and C&I segments are in pain, as you can see on the table below the slide. But this trend is becoming the second quarter of 2024. In 2025, ANI estimates a projection of 5.5 gigawatts of new installation. The data shows a continuing decline in installation in the residential and the C&I segments. Utility scale installations are growing thanks to permit simplification up to 10 megawatts, while large utility scale installations are struggling due to permit difficulties. Repowering data are interesting. It's a growing market in Italy, thanks especially to utility and C&I segments. You can see PV growth quite 70% compared 2024 with 2023. PV targets included new installation of 7 gigawatts per year in the 5-year period, 2026-2027. And to achieve these goals, Italy wants to make the most of rooftop installation, but it cannot do without a large-scale system. As you can see, our TSO approximately has 4,000 requests of connection on PV plants for 150 gigawatts of power. There are plants over 10 megawatts. We do know we do not have also DSO data available, but we know that our biggest DSO in 2024 had 88,000 low voltage connection requests for 1.3 gigawatts and 21,000 medium volt requests for connection for 42 gigawatts. This is an annual renewable observatory relating to the authorization procedures for environmental assessments of PV plants larger than 10 megawatts. As you can see, 68% of the authorized power is agrivoltaic. Several projects included hybridization with BESS. And unfortunately, only 9% of the authorized power has completed the permit process. This is a big problem for the large utility scale and large utility scale. Starting with BESS markets, similarly to the PV sector, the BESS sector also records a decline in installation in the residential and C&I market segments. But thanks to the installation of large-scale BESS, the installed power and capacity in 2025 will compensate for the decline of the other two market segments. In the residential PV segment, consumers almost always request the combination with the BESS. The graph shows the megawatt hour installed in 2024 in the dark purple line compared to the cumulative total for 2023 with the light purple line. It's highlighted that several large BESS scale were installed in Sardinia, having won the capacity market auction held by our TSO in the years prior to 2023. These numbers in the table highlight what I said before. That is, the BESS market in Italy is moving at two speeds. Residential and C&I slowing, utility scale and large utility scale growing. Between the 2022 and 2024, our TSO published some scenarios. The electricity storage requirement decreased in 2 years by 20 gigawatt hours. In the 2024 scenario, the TSO forecast on a demand of 71 gigawatt hour by 2030. In this scenario, Italy should install approximately 11 gigawatt hours per year. In 2025, the TSO announced an auction, the MAXE auction for 10 gigawatt hours with delivery in 2028. I think it's fair to say we are late in reaching our goal in this moment. Also, our TSO publish this information. We have approximately 3,600 connection requests for 300 gigawatt hour of BESS, BESS plant over 10 megawatts. This is an ANE renewable observatory relating to the authorization procedures for the construction of electricity storage system larger than 10 megawatts. 97% of the authorized power is BESS. Unfortunately, only 7% of the authorized power has completed the permit process, as you can see. And now we start with an overview about the policy in Italy. In these two slides, in this we represent the measure about the residential market and the C&I, and the next about the utility scale plants. We show the actual policy that activated the demand we show the impact of this measure. We have a lot of support mechanism for PV and some for BESS. But I would like to focus on the next slide to conclude my interview. Currently in Italy, several regulatory measures are in place that will impact the RES development in the coming years. It's not just about demand support mechanism. The most relevant are in the National Annual Economic Law, that it confirms 50% tax credit for residential segment. For this, the industrial sector, however, we will move from the tax credit provided for the Transition 5.0 plan to super amortization mechanism. This changes, it's a good news because PV and BESS investments are not linked with the energy efficiency target that investors are to reach. On the other hand, the government has blocked access to this plan, having reached the 2.5 billion ceiling. From the information we have of the 2.5 billion in investment, only 7% is earmarked for PV and perhaps for BESS. The other important measure is the revision of the administrative procedure decree. It seems to us that it takes steps backwards compared to the previous regulatory framework. We need also to resolve the issue of virtual grid saturation. You have seen over 600 gigawatts of RES and BESS request to our TSO. We need to optimize grid use and cost and ensure that plants, RES plants and BESS are installed where there is hosting capacity and where there is a need. And about the final FERIX, decree for incentives, renewable, also PV, and capacity market and MACSE auction, it will important in the future how Italy introduce net zero industry act requirements. And going to the end, just few information. We expect the auction results to be published by mid-December 2025 about the auction of the transitory FERIX. This auction ended in September and in October with the first auction with 8 gigawatt and the second with 1.6 gigawatt with no price criteria. The first without no price criteria. The good news is that the PV signal is very good because it is 50% less than the day-ahead price market in Italy. And about the second auction, Italy imposed only resilient requirements provided by the Net Zero Industry Act regulation. You can see the 4 requirements. And to conclude, the result about the MACSE auction is very interesting because the starting price was 37,000 euro megawatt hour per year for 15 years. The bid was 60% below the starting price. So you can see the result in this slide about the market zone in Italy, the marginal price and the average price in each zone, and the distribution of the selected capacity. Because Terna put the auction, a figure of capacity for each zone, especially for each zone. So the operator can't offer in the other zone or the markets, and Terna kept the capacity for each zone. So thanks you for the attention.
Thanks, Michelangelo. That was very insightful. If there are any questions, please in the Q&A. So we continue with Italy now with a view from Elettricità Futura, and we have Paolo Dermo giving us some insights. Paolo, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I start with my countdown. So thank you for this opportunity. Elettricità Futura is the main Italian association of the electric sector. We represent 70% of the producer of electricity in Italy, and we are part of Confindustria, that is the National Industrial Association, like ANI. So we also monitor the evolution of renewables in Italy. This is the total installations up to the September 2025 in Italy about renewables. We have more or less 80 gigawatts of renewables. Half of these 8 gigawatts are solar. In 2025, in the first nine months of 2025, we installed 4.4 gigawatt of renewables and 4 more or less gigawatt of photovoltaic. The piece of evolution is slowed down, as also Solar Power Europe showed us at the beginning of the webinar. This is also already shown what is the size of the plants and what are the segments of the plants in the solar sector. You can see that we still have the bulk of our solar park in the residential sector, or let's say up to 1 megawatt sites for power plants. But in the last 2-3 years, as Michelangelo showed us, the utility scale is growing and is accelerating the installations. What about the geographic distribution? We have a lot of solar panels and solar plants that are located in the northern part of Italy, and also in the center, Lazio, where Rome is placed, also it has a big capacity installed, and also Puglia, where we have also the biggest installations for wind in Italy. What about the potential of increase these plants? We have seen that we have more or less 80 gigawatts of renewables. So we as Elettricità Futura run a study in the first half of 2025 on what are the potential of repowering for solar, photovoltaic, and wind power in Italy, installed power. And in particular, we estimated the renewable potential for plants that has more than 10 years for photovoltaic, and for plants that are finishing the incentive period for wind sector. I will showcase you in a few minutes the results of our analysis. We have estimated that only for solar, we could add in Italy more or less 50 gigawatts on the actual more or less 75 gigawatts of repowered power. We have 7.5 gigawatts of plants in Italy of capacity in Italy that has more than 10 years, and so we can add to this 7.5 other 15 gigawatts. And what about wind? We could double the power if we repower almost 6 gigawatts of power that to date has convenience to repower. We can double it and add other 6 gigawatts. So a total of 21 gigawatts in addition to the 13 gigawatts considered for solar and wind. And what it does mean in terms of targets, 2030 targets that also Michelangelo showed us for photovoltaic, for example, it would mean to have 1/3 of the objective by 2030, the 2030 objective, acquired only with repowering. Only with the repowering of these 7.5 gigawatts of plants to be repowered, and without additional space, because what we consider and analyzed is that a lot of utility scale, and we analyzed only utility scale plants, and a lot of the bulk of the utility scale plants in Italy, ground mounted, have a lot of space that is not already used, but already authorized. So you can increase not only the power replacing the same panels, but you can increase also the space, and so you have an increase of these magnitudes. What it would mean in terms of production, you can increase the production of this park of an additional 80 terawatt hour, 18 terawatt hour for solar photovoltaic, and 22 terawatt hour for wind. So we could add more or less 40 terawatt hour on 54 terawatt hour that wind and solar together produced in 2023. So more or less a doubling of production from renewables in Italy only with the repowering. And what this means also in terms of avoiding the loss of production from the same power plants, because if you assume that these power plants are not repowered, you can assume that these plants will stop to produce electricity from renewables. So you can imagine that you can have a loss of this production that is estimated in more or less 11.5 terawatt hour for wind generation, 7.5 terawatt hour for solar power generation, because we assumed that 7.5 gigawatts not repowered will end the production in next years, and so you more or less could lost 7.5 terawatt hour of solar generation in Italy. And what does it mean in terms of investments? Also, it will mean important investments activated from the private sector in, let's say, 3 years, up to 30 billion euros. That you can put in place. Only for photovoltaic, we estimated that with cost of OPEX and CAPEX, you can the CAPEX cost you could mobilitate 15 billion euros, let's say in a 2-3 years time frame. On territories that have already knowledge about the technology and on territory that are already committed to renewable energies. So it will be a win-win, really a win-win situation. So what about these are the potential and are big and are big opportunities, and we hope that repowering will be also favored by auctioning or other, for example, mechanisms that on which we are working. For the repowering of wind, we already experienced a positive evolution in Italy in the first half of 2025 for repowering of wind power. For solar, we hope that now with the revision of Testo Unico and also with other simplification on the solar, also the repowering of solar power will be simplified and also accelerated, considering these big opportunities. I finish with 2 slides, giving you also an overview on the third quarter in Italy on electricity prices and also the generation mix in the third quarter of 2025. We have a prezzo unico nazionale, the price, wholesale price that is stabilized around 110 euro megawatt hour. On the 2024 third quarter 2024, we experienced a decrease in the price in the wholesale price. And we also see a production in the same quarter, leaded by renewables and also self-consumption. In self-consumption, you have also a lot of renewables. And what was relevant in this quarter, what that is worth to note is that in the third quarter 2025 against 2024, we experienced a decrease in the hydroelectric. That is a very important renewable energy in Italy. But it is also important to know that in August, for example, in the middle of this graph, you can see that natural gas has had a minor role, and in that part of the third quarter, we also experienced a decrease of wholesale markets, so benefiting from a higher production from renewable energies. So this is at glance what is the evolution of prices also in Italy, and also the production in the third quarter, and also the opportunities that we see for the repowering of renewable energies in Italy. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Paolo. Very interesting. Yeah, very interesting also to see this potential of repowering. I think we should go more into that. If there are any questions, please use this opportunity. There's a Q&A window. If you have any questions, please ask them. The panelists are happy to answer. Final presentation, please bear with us 10 more minutes. European Wunderkind, as a German might say. So Finland is very, very interesting as a market these days, and Clara will give us some more details. Clara.
Thank you so much, and greetings from Helsinki, where, fun fact, it is already dark, but it's all the more pleasure for me to bring some sunlight into the situation here in the very northern corner of Europe. So now my name is Clara Tappero. I come from Renewables Finland, which obviously is the national association for renewable energy here, well, in Finland. Fun fact, for quite a few decades, we were known as the Finnish Wind Power Association until last year, a bit more than a year ago, we decided to renew ourselves and expand our actions into utility scale solar PV as well as storage solutions. We have over 200 member companies all throughout the entire value chain in renewable energy. So we're pretty good, in a pretty good situation, and in an interesting time, to be honest. Just to paint a picture on where we're going as of right now, as of last year, obviously wind power is growing rapidly here, and we are pretty much in a good place to add more and more solar. Kind of makes a good mix with wind power, with hybrid projects and all that. We're pretty clean and we're pretty renewable as of already, but the sun will be shining even brighter in the future. But first, just let's take a quick look at the current situation here. As you can see, we are now only focused in the utility scale solar PV, as of that is kind of our bread and butter here. Basically, the entire story only started about 3-4 years ago here. And the growth has been pretty steep ever since. As you can see from the graph, we have already doubled our utility scale solar power capacity during the first half of this year, 2025. And I know that the numbers are not particularly great or huge just yet, but just watch as we move forward during the following years. Let's take a quick look at at what's going on the project development side, looking into the future, it is indeed looking pretty bright. We have way over 300 individual projects all over the country, especially mostly in the west and in the south. And obviously, as you might know, not all of these projects will be completed, but this is a kind of a nice foresight nonetheless. A lot of things are going on and moving forward as we speak. And indeed, our national grid operator, Fingrid, has also estimated that solar power capacity in Finland might increase up to 10-fold in 10 years. And the big additions come from utility scale solar PV. As of right now, obviously, most of the capacity is on the rooftop installations, but the big increase in capacity in the electricity mix will come from utility scale PV, which we are focusing on here. This picture right here, the picture that you can see, it is a solar power plant that is brand new. It only entered production literally last week, and it is situated in the northernmost part of Europe, in Lapland. And this is kind of an exciting example and an inspiring example of what is possible. Just a few years ago, it was still kind of deemed impossible to kind of bring solar PV in this scale into the very northern part of Europe. But as you can see, we are doing it right now, right here. Just to go through very quickly a few highlights on how this is possible. Basically, the solar radiation in Finland, especially in the south and west, it is surprisingly good, at least decent. In fact, our solar radiation is pretty much on the same level as northern Germany. And as we heard a little bit earlier, obviously, Germany is the leading market in Europe. So the basics are there. The yield, or how much you can produce electricity with solar power in Finland, it is at least reasonable. Maybe not right now, as it's already dark in here, but from February all the way to October, it is at least reasonable, even good, due to our long summer days and our bright spring-winter days. And this is very much thanks to the bifacial panels that can actually utilize the reflecting solar radiation from the snow, for example. Obviously, there are new solutions, and obviously we have tons of land, and utilizing wasteland is a big thing right now. We can utilize former peatlands, of which we have plenty of old landfills, kind of like sites that don't really have that much land use value otherwise. And our companies and people in general are pretty excited to kind of see a new form of energy production on those sites as well. Obviously, the grid is good, and we can utilize it even more efficiently with hybrid projects. Like I mentioned earlier, we have tons of wind, there will be more solar, there will be more storage solutions. Those things combined, as you can see in the photo from the Lapland side, you can see that it's a pretty good mix. And obviously, the demand from industry and heating in particular are going to make a steep growth in electricity demand as well. So there will be room for solar as well. Let's go through a couple of things here in the end for grand finale, kind of what's going on underneath, what are the current policy topics. Basically two things, the market situation and the regulation side. Like I think Marius already mentioned, the current market situation indeed is kind of challenging. Finland has if not the lowest, at least the second lowest electricity prices in all of Europe. We're kind of in that competition with Sweden, very cheap. And obviously that reflects into the PPA market as well. But as I already mentioned, we are expecting new industrial investments that will kind of have an impact on the consumption of electricity, and also in that way create more market-driven opportunities for solar companies as well. From the regulation side, there are quite a few things. As I mentioned, solar power is pretty new, and so they are introducing new regulation kind of often. Maybe the biggest, most notable thing as of right now is the new Land Use Act, because that has kind of tricky, even unfavorable proposals, zoning requirements, restrictions in building into certain areas. But we are doing our very best all day, almost all night, to try and tackle those challenges. When it comes to this particular government proposal, the Land Use Act, it is still under negotiations. It hasn't yet entered the parliament, so we're doing our very best to try and make it more feasible for our solar companies. Anyway, for the end of my very quick presentation, I'm just telling you, the sun is indeed rising, and it's rising from the north, and we're beyond excited to see what kind of solutions there will be in the future. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thanks, Clara. Very exciting. Yeah, it's still bright here. Okay, no, I think that was wonderful. It was also great to get this overview from Finland, to see actually that there's also quite some momentum in new and emerging markets in Europe. What I would like to do, I think we are running already 5 minutes over time, so we skipped the panel that we had planned. So just a few things from my side. Thanks, first of all, thanks to everyone presenting well and listening, and also providing inputs. I think I cannot use my pointer anyway. If you are interested in further events, you can scan this QR code here, then you get an overview on our website. Next slide, please. The next event, physical event that we organize, is our Sustainable Solar conference in Brussels on December 3rd. We will look into all topics touching sustainability. Then we have, obviously, on December 11, as I already mentioned, the launch of our European Market Outlook, where we also have digested what we learned today. And that leaves me to say thanks again, have a nice afternoon, and talk to you soon again. Ciao, ciao.